All right, we're ready to go.
Great. And welcome to the Finance Auditing Committee of Thursday, February 23rd, 2023. It is 11:16. Call to order our meeting. And before we begin, please note the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube and recorded. Members of the public are encouraged to watch or listen to the meeting online or by dialing into 415-569-6446 for the audio of this meeting. If you would like to provide public comments at today's meeting, if you have not done so already, please call 415-569-6446 and let the facilitator know what items you would like to speak on today. And with that, Madam Secretary, can you please call the roll?
Thank you. Starting with Director Cochran.
Here.
Director Giudice.
Here.
Director Grosball.
Here.
Director Hernandez.
Here.
Director Rodoni.
Here.
Vice Chair Parr. Vice Chair Parr has not rejoined us yet. Chair Rabbit.
Here.
And President Theriault.
Here.
Thank you. You do have a quorum. And also on the line, you have directors. The Garbarino is no longer on the line. Director Hill is on the line. Director Maston, Director Snyder, and Director Thiers. So you are a committee of the whole still. On the line, we also have Dennis Mulligan.
Here.
Joe Wire.
Yes.
Eva Bauer-Furbish.
Present.
Kim Manolian.
Morning.
Morning. And Madeline Chun.
Morning.
Dave Rivera.
Morning, President.
Mona Babata.
Present.
And Kelly Hopper is not with us right now. And that confirms everyone on the line.
Great.
I'm sorry, Amarette. I came in late. This is Director Parr.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much. And I'd like to remind everyone again to mute their microphones. Looking forward to not doing this at our next meeting, by the way. But remind everyone to mute their microphones until after the staff's presentations, and remember to unmute when we open up for directors discussion. If we have directors joining us by phone, please use your mute button or *6 to unmute yourself. After staff's presentation, I'll be asking for any questions or comments on the item. Click on the raise hand function on your device if you have a question, or press *9 if joining by phone. If there are any questions, the secretary or I will call on you accordingly. And if we missed your raised hand, please, by all means, speak up. And after our discussion, we will ask for any public comment. Before moving on, please follow along by referring to the page numbers located at the bottom right-hand corner of your meeting packet. Madam Secretary, can you please introduce the first item?
Thank you, Chair Rabbit. Item number 3 is ratification of previous actions by the Auditor Control. That packet of commitments, ratification, investments before you and begins on page 5. Wale is here with us today to go over PFM's investment report for January 2023, and that begins on page 9 of your packet. Wale, I'm going to turn things over to you, and I'm going to share screen and show the report. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Amarette. Good morning, everyone. So we will go over the investment report as of January 2023. So if we jump to the next slide, this gives you an idea of how rates have moved. We did see a slight uptick in rates on the shorter end of the curve. So if you look at the 3-month and the 6-month rates, you can see that those did change by 30 and 5 basis points respectively. So we get deeper into the yield curve in the 1 to 5 year space, you can see rates did move down at the end of the month. Currently, I think the 2-year yield is starting to move a little bit higher, so these numbers might look a little bit different once we get into the February report. Move on to the next slide, and we take a look at the debt ceiling. So the debt ceiling has been something that has been on the minds of a couple of folks. We've been getting a lot of questions around that. We actually at PFM do have some additional commentary we can send out if anyone is concerned about that. But at this moment, we just want to let you know that the debt ceiling basically is saying that, you know, we have sort of reached our maximum limit of debt authorized by Congress. And, you know, these are expenses that have already been approved. So basically, by increasing the limit, what that does, it just lets Congress raise additional funds to meet their spending obligations. So right now, Janet Yellen and the U.S., they do not plan on defaulting. and they're going to take, as we usually see, will take the appropriate measures to get this issue settled. So as of this moment, for us here at PFM, there is not anything to be overly concerned about, but it is something to definitely monitor until I think they're going to be reconvening on this issue sometime later in the year. We move on to the next slide. Just some minutes from the last federal committee meeting. One of the biggest things that we want to point out from the last meeting is that Chairman Powell has been animate about not making any rate cuts in 2023. So the likelihood of any rate cuts in this year are highly unlikely based on what the Fed is communicating, based on the data that they're looking at now. The market is pricing something in slightly different. The market is saying that we could potentially see some rate cuts in the back half of 2023. So there is a disconnect there. So again, something to monitor. But again, based on what Jerome Powell and the federal committee members are letting us know, we're not anticipating any rate cuts in 2023. Next slide. We look here and won't spend too much time on here, but these are just some indicators that we take a look at to see whether the economy is expanding or contracting. ISM manufacturing is showing numbers or showing levels of potential contractions. So the data that we're starting to see there, not necessarily a warning sign for any sort of recession, but just something to keep in mind that growth could be slowing down into the year. We move on to the next slide, and we take a look at unemployment. So again, one of the more positive pieces of economic data that we've seen, unemployment decreased to 3.4%, one of its lowest levels that we've seen in a long time. We added over 500,000 jobs in January, and we also saw that the labor force participation rate is starting to increase. So we're starting to see more people enter the labor force and kind of close that gap between supply and demand when it comes to employers and employees. We move on to the next slide. And here we're looking at what potentially we could be seeing in 2023. So there is a potential that we could see the 2-year start to, or the Fed funds rate in the 2-year, which kind of move in lockstep together, start to top out somewhere around 4.89% somewhere in June of this year. Again, we saw the 2-year start to creep up a little bit more in February. Long-term rates are also starting to move higher, but we're not seeing the same aggressive moves that we saw in 2022, which is good. So we're sort of, I would say we're closer to the peak than we were 12 to 16 months ago. So again, something to monitor moving forward. We move on to the next slide. Here, this is just an overview of some of the purchases that were made in the portfolio. If you look at the major purchases that we saw that we spent or we made purchases of about 3.8 million in corporate notes for the month, and then also too, when we look at treasuries and agency notes and asset-backed securities, we made purchases of about 6.3 million. Now the yield to maturity, and when we look at those yields, again, very, very attractive. With the exception of U.S. Treasuries, all of these are well above 4%. So this is going to bode well for the portfolio in the future as we're able to generate higher yields and boost the overall yield of the portfolio moving forward. Next slide is just an overview of our outlook. This is something that you can read at your leisure. And then the next slide is just basically an asset allocation of the portfolio. The earnings of the portfolio, when you include Leif and Camp, has now gone up to about 2.24%. So again, making that slow but steady climb in boosting the overall income generation of the portfolio over time. That's it for my presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Wale. I'll look to my colleagues to see if there's any hands raised. I do see one, and that's our president, President Terrio.
No real questions on the presentation. I do note the paragraph at the bottom of page 8 of the presentation, page 17 of the package, that begins, the mortgage-backed securities sector maintained momentum from Q4 and was a top-of-class performer to kickstart this year. And remembering 2008, that does not make me feel all warm and cozy.
So remember in 2008, a lot of what we saw in the mortgage sector, where the defaults happened, those were the subprime mortgage rates. So those were, mortgages for folks whose credit levels were well below what you would typically like to extend credit to for people purchasing homes. The credit quality of the asset-backed securities that we purchased in the portfolio for the district remains very, very high credit quality. So default risk is very, very low in that sector where we're sort of, investing the funds. So very, very different sectors, but your concern is warranted because that is something that we did see back in 2008. But credit qualities were very, very different compared to what we have and what happened in 2008.
I was pretty sure that you guys were doing the right thing with regard to the mortgage-backed securities, but yeah, the broader concern was for the economy as a whole because of the
Sure, I agree. I agree.
Appreciate that. Anyone else have any questions? I will say that last week I did have the opportunity to, back in Washington, D.C. at the National Association of Counties, we had Janet Yellen come speak to us, which was interesting. Obviously, I think she's undoubtedly a brilliant economist, but coffee was really her best ally during that presentation. It was a little rough. It was all about the company line, which is understandable in her new role. We did, by the way, have Pete Buttigieg speak to us, as well as President Biden, I think a week ago, Tuesday. So all very good, but I just thought I'd mention that about Janet Yellen. She did not give us any deep insight, really outside of kind of what's been touted and the fact that we're not in a recession, at least for the present. So Wale, thank you so much for the presentation, much appreciated. And with that, I believe I'll conclude discussion on the item. And before we take a vote, I'll ask Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on item 3?
We do. We have a speaker. Mr. Pilpel would like to speak on item number 3. 1 second, and we're going to ask Mr. Pilpel.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay, just a very minor item. I always learn something with the PFM report. I really appreciate that. On page 7 of the report, 16 of the packet, the first reference to LAIF and CAMP, I should know what those stand for. I apologize, I don't. In the future, if the first reference to an acronym can be spelled out, I think that would help. The other things like ABS and MBS, I think, are appropriately spelled out. That's all. Again, I really appreciate their report. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Anyone else, Madam Secretary?
We have no other speakers.
All right, then I'll look to my colleagues to see if I get a motion on item number 3.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second, and Madam Secretary, can you please call the roll?
Thank you. We have a first and second on item 3, starting with Director Conroy, who's absent. Dorsey is absent. Garbarino is absent. Giudice.
Yes.
Grossbull.
Yes.
Hernandez.
Aye.
Maston.
Aye.
Moulton Peters is absent. Parr.
Aye.
Rabbit.
Aye.
Verdoni.
Aye.
Safai is absent. Snyder.
Aye.
Stephanie. Stephanie is absent. Deer.
Aye.
Second Vice President Hill.
Yes.
First Vice President Cochran.
Yes.
And President Terrio.
Yes.
Thank you. You have 12 ayes.
Great, thank you very much. That motion passes. Next on the agenda is item 4A, which is to authorize a budget increase in the fiscal year 22-23 Bridge Division capital budget for project number 2321, the Suicide Deterrent System Rescue Training Net. The staff report for that is on page 25. We just heard the presentation from our chief engineer earlier in the Building and Operating Committee meeting. If there are no further questions for staff, I would like to continue. And are there any questions, comments, or concerns from directors on item 4A? I do see one. I think it has to do with a recusal, and I'll go to Director Tier.
Thank you so much. Yes, I would like to recuse myself on this item due to a potential conflict of interest. So I'll turn off my camera and rely on Emirates.
Got
Right.
it. All right, in the waiting room. Thank you. We can continue.
With that, seeing no other hands raised, that concludes our discussion on the item. Before we move on, Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on item 4A?
We have no speakers on item 4A.
With that, can we get a motion to approve?
Mr. Chair, I'll so move.
Great.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, and Madam Secretary, can you please call the roll?
Thank you. Voting on item 4A with the first and second, starting with Conroy is absent. Dorsey is absent. Garbarino is absent. Giudice,
Yes.
Grosboll,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Aye.
Maston,
Aye.
Moulton Peters is absent. Parr,
Aye.
Rabbit,
Aye.
Redoni,
Aye.
Safai is absent. Snyder,
Aye.
Stephanie is absent. Thier is absent. Second Vice President Hill,
Yes.
First Vice President Cochran,
Yes.
and President Terrio.
Yes.
Thank you. You have 11 ayes.
Great, thank you. All that motion passes. Next on the agenda is item 4B, which is to authorize a budget increase in the fiscal year 22-23 Bridge Division capital budget for project number 1526, Golden Gate Bridge Suicide Deterrent System Construction Project. The staff report begins on page 29, and similar to the previous item, we just heard the presentation from Ewa earlier in the Building and Operating Committee meeting. If there are no further questions for staff, I'd like to continue. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns from directors on item 4B? Not seeing any hands. That concludes our discussion on item 4B. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on item 4B, Madam Secretary?
We have no speakers for item 4B.
Great. With that, can we get a motion to approve?
So move, Chair Rabbit.
Great.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second.
Second.
Madam Secretary, can you please call the roll?
Thank you. Starting with Director Conroy on item 4B, who's absent. Dorsey is absent. Garbarino is absent. Giudice,
Yes.
Grosboll,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Aye.
Maston,
Aye.
Moulton Peters is absent. Parr,
Aye.
Rabbit,
Aye.
Redoni,
Aye.
Safai is absent. Snyder,
Aye.
Stephanie is absent. Thier,
Aye.
Second Vice President Hill,
Yes.
First Vice President Cochran,
Yes.
and President Terrio.
Yes.
Thank you. That's 12 ayes.
Great. And we'll let Director Thier back in.
Director Thier back in for this item, so she was with us in this vote.
Oh, there you are. The Zoom page is full, so thank you for coming back. That motion does pass. We have no reports under item 5, so we'll move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is to approve renewal of the Marine Insurance Program. Staff report begins on page 37. Director of Risk Management and Safety, Kelly Vitale, is here to present the report. Kelly, please tell us what our insurance looks like for the upcoming year.
Good morning, directors. So the approval, the item that for approval is before you today on page 37 is the annual renewal of the Marine Insurance Program. And just to give you a brief summary, it does cover 5 lines of coverage. And I'll just give you just a small recap, but if you want more information or if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So it does cover what's called our protection and indemnity coverage. And that covers nearly all of the maritime liability risks that are associated with the actual operation of a vessel. The second line of coverage is the hull and machinery. And as you might expect, that covers the vessel or the fleet against physical damage. And that can be done by peril at sea or other covered perils. The next item for renewal is our marine general liability. And we have 2 components to that. We have coverage up to $2 million. And then we have the next line of coverage is excess. And so as you might expect, the general liability is for bodily injury or property damage that's during the actual loading and unloading process. And then our excess coverage is just, it picks up where actually that the primary coverage ends, right? So after $2 million. So I was given some good news. And I'll draw your attention to the last page, which is, I believe, page 40, where you'll see the table. And that it looks like there might have been a mistake. And so I want to make sure it gets corrected. And I want to make sure that you know the new total that we're looking for. So we had previously been quoted, and let me back up. Let me give you a little story. So marine coverage only renews once a year, and that's February 20th. And we can't change that like we could change our other lines of coverage because 1, we are in a large club, the Steamship Club, and that is just historically when all marine coverages have renewed since the beginning of time, I'm told. So The problem with that is that no one will bind any coverage until just about the week before. So they go out, they try to get us quotes and such. But the reason that we were, one, able to see a reduction, and two, able to bind so quickly is because of our participation in this steamship club, which has just been critical to our pricing and the amount of coverage that we're able to get. So back to page 40, where the table is, I'll draw your attention to the last column where it says 2023, 2024. And also the table, the last paragraph, fiscal impact, which is on page 39. So on page 39, the total number is $914,908 is what our premiums will be for all 5 lines of coverage. On your table, however, it says that $1,079,187. And that's incorrect, because what we were able to do is, through the club, we were able to receive 164,000 some odd change savings in our excess, our marine general and excess layers. And so it brought those down, and that savings is the 914,908. So I'm hoping that's not confusing. I apologize for the error, but I didn't want anybody to be confused by the fiscal impact saying 914,000, but then the table saying $1 million. And so again, I just want to let you know that it's because of our participation in that steamship club that's brought us those tremendous savings. And I also actually do expect a true up, because now obviously our policies were bound on Tuesday. They took effect on Monday, but they didn't bind until Tuesday because of the holiday. And because of that, we do expect a little bit more savings as well. And I'll be sure to let the directors know what that true up is. But for now, I know at least we've saved almost $165,000. So at this time, if you have any questions about the coverage, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Well, Kelly, that's great. I appreciate very much your explanation in the presentation, and our membership in the Steamship Club, which I got to say, I have a smile on my face every time I heard that, because I thought of something very different,
Right?
along the lines of Caddyshack or something. But
right.
appreciate very much the opportunity to save in the pool,
Right.
and have a good name while we're at it. So I'll look to my colleagues to see if there's any questions, comments, or concerns on their marine insurance policy renewal. I am not seeing any, and I'll look to Madam Secretary to see if there's anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this item.
We do. We have Mr. Pilpa who would like to speak on this item. In a second, let me unmute him.
Sorry, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you okay. Go ahead, David.
Okay, sorry about that. So just 3 brief comments, some of which has been superseded by the presentation just now. On page 1 of the staff report, I was confused at the bottom. These recommendations are made with the understanding the requisite funds will be available in the current fiscal year operating budget. I think I would have ended it there. I'm not sure if any of these particular items are in the bridge, bus, or district divisions, because these all seem very related. My next point, but I'm not sure that that changes anything here. I was absolutely confused on page 4 or 40 of the packet about whether the total was 914,908 or 1,079,187, but I think that was just explained. The answer is 918,908, or perhaps slightly less based on the Monday, Tuesday thing. So that clears that up. And I was also going to ask if it's possible to transition to a calendar year or even fiscal year coverage term. And it sounds like the short answer is no, because of the club and February, and that's just the way it is. You know, it might be better from a fiscal perspective to be on a fiscal year basis, but if this just works in this odd way and it's February to February, then so be it. And perhaps my question was answered. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, David. Anyone else, Madam Secretary?
We have no other speakers for this item.
Appreciate your comments regarding the fiscal year and calendar year, although I got to say that from the fiscal perspective, saving $164,000 is well worth it to meet the deadline of February 20th as compared to the alternative. So with that, I'll look for a motion to approve.
So moved.
So moved. I'll second. Hard.
Is So we have a motion and a second. If we could have a roll call, please.
Thank you. We're voting on item number 6, starting with Director Conroy, who's absent. Director Dorsey is absent. Garbarino is absent. Judith Che, please.
Yes.
Grosball,
Aye.
Hernandez,
Aye.
Maston,
Aye.
Moulton Peters is absent. Parr,
Aye.
Rabbit,
Aye.
Rodoni,
Aye.
Safai is absent. Snyder,
Aye.
Stephanie is absent. Thier,
Aye.
Second Vice President Hill,
Yes.
First Vice President Cochran,
Yes.
and President Terrio.
Yes.
Can I ask a quick question at the end?
You have 12 ayes. Go ahead.
Yeah, the steamship club, you have to be a steamship.
No, you do not.
Okay. Thanks.
There we go. No coal carrying vessels or anything of the sort. So thank you for that.
Or electrical.
We'll move on then to that motion passes. Next on the agenda is item 7, status report of the fiscal year 22-23 budget. The staff report begins on page 41, and Joe Wire will be presenting the item. Joe, please go ahead.
Thank you very much to the chair, to the rest of the committee and the committee of the whole. We'll take a look at the status report, and as I mentioned last month, I will say it again, that this covers the current budget. This is the year that will end in June of 23. There was very little change from the last month. We, as you know, started this year with a $75 million deficit. We're planning to spend the one-time emergency funding. The tables and charts that follow in this report do show how we're going to do that. The only change in this report is we've updated it for the actual revenues that had been earned by the bridge and bus and ferry through tolls and fares. And since we'll be looking at those in the next couple of items, I think I'll just leave it at that and see if you have any questions on this report.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Any questions for Joe on this report? Not seeing any hands raised. Madam Secretary, any public comment on this item?
Sorry about that. I was flipping pages and I was noting Director Judith Che just sent his regrets. He had to leave the meeting.
Okay.
We have a speaker. David would like to comment on item number 7. So we'd like to unmute. And David, are you still there?
I am.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, and this is my last intended comment for the day. So I hope the first meeting of the Strategic Financial Plan Advisory Committee, if that's what it's called, went well. I'm happy to provide comments on that when the time is right. Since the last meeting, my calculated fiscal cliff date is now about March 8th of 2024, so just over a year from now, and that moved back about a week from last month. So that's another 7 or 8 days achieved. But time is still very much of the essence. If, in my view, bridge tolls may need to increase July 1, 2024 or sooner, and several months lead time would be needed on that. So in my view, I guess the sooner the strategic financial plan comes together and the revenue needs of the district are clear, given whatever the operations are going to be going forward, the better. But once again, great work by staff throughout to manage the budget in continuing difficult times. That's all for me for today. Thank you very much for listening.
Great. Thank you, David. Madam Secretary, seeing no other public comment, we'll move on. No action is required on this item. So moving on then to item 8, we have the monthly review of Golden Gate Bridge traffic, tolls, bus and ferry transit, patronage and fares. That begins on page 51. Joe will present this item as well as item 9A, which is the monthly statement of revenue and expenses. That's on page 61. 9B, the monthly statement of capital programs and expenditures. That's on page 71. So Joe, please go ahead.
Thank you very much again to the chair and to the committee and the full board. We're looking at both our patronage on the bridge and on the bus and ferry system in this report. If you look at page 53, that's the chart that we typically, or the table we typically look at. It'll show, just in summary, on the far right-hand side is the right-hand side is the revenue, the left-hand side is ridership. Looking at the right-hand side for the revenue, you can see that we now have data for the first 7 months. You'll see the falling in the third column from the right. You can see that the numbers, as you go down in each, for bridge, bus, and ferry, they decrease. And that's what we're seeing is the summer highs in our business tend to be less in the wintertime. It's something we've seen for a very long time. We saw that again. We're seeing that this winter, so we're following a relatively similar pattern. It's too early, obviously, to know, but the expectation is that they will then, and we're planning that they will then rise back up as we move into the warmer weather. And the extent of that rise will give us an idea whether or not we're going to get an overall growth this year, or we'll have a year somewhat similar to last year. And that is clearly too early for us to tell that at this point. And then following this are the 2 pages in 55 and 56 are the charts where we compare these this year to the previous 4 years, looking way back, I guess you could say, to the pre-COVID time. I won't be pointing out anything specific because, frankly, they are following, this is following almost exactly where last year was, just slightly higher this year. We're only in the first month of the calendar year, which these graphs work from. So you can see it, they're just, the one dot is slightly ahead. So as we go through the year, we'll spend more time with these just to follow its progression with the previous years. And with that, I would move on to the next report, and I will give you the page number. That is page 61. And then we can come back for questions on all these at the end. But if you have something right away, please just speak up. But on page 61, they will look at the actual finances for the district. And if I could draw your attention to the middle of the page on page 61, that's the table that consolidates all of the data that's in the line item reports that follow. And those line item reports cover both the district as a whole, but also the bridge, bus, ferry, and district divisions. We roll everything up into one set of numbers in the front, and we'll take a look at those. So the bold numbers in the middle of the table, I'd like to draw your attention to those. The first line of bold numbers, it's the third row down, the third line down, is the district's operating revenue. The number to the far right, the $12 million, is what we actually earned this year, $112 million. And then as you move to the left, you get what we thought we'd earn in the budget, which was only 107 or almost 108. And then they've moved farther to the left is the 100 million, 8 or 101 million, which is what we earned last year. And so the good news there is that this year's revenues are greater. Primarily toll revenue is doing that with some different in the local grant revenue that came through. So that's good news. And that has been a pattern we've seen each of the months so far this year. And then going to the next, just directly down, is also good news in one way, is that $127 million number you see again on the far right is the total expenses we've had. If you go to the left, it's lower than the 149 million, which is what we budgeted. But it is higher than the 119. That's the number just to the left of that, which is what we spent last year. So you can see our expenses are up rather substantially from last year, but they're down quite a bit from where we budgeted. The significance of that being below budgeted is that, we produced an aspirational budget that would allow us to meet demand for our services by our customers if that demand had increased. And so far this year, it has not increased by very much. It's increased marginally, and we have increased our services marginally. So we are not spending that money budgeted. What that does mean is that $20+ million, $21 million will stay in the district's treasury and be able to be used in the future to fund transit services. And that will prolong the ability of the district to continue in this time of shortfall or deficit spending. The last bolded line, which is the third one down, is the difference between, of course, revenue and expenses. And that's the key one for us right now. Far to the left, the number that's 15.108.6. It's $15,100,000. So that right now is the amount through 7 months that we have spent greater than the amount that we have earned. Of course, we are going to use one-time federal funding. We are using one-time federal funding to settle that bill in order to keep our expenses level. But that's when the one-time federal money runs out, that's the $15 million is the issue that we will have to settle. And of course, the work that was mentioned earlier about with the strategic financial planning committee will be working on. With that, let's take a quick look at page 71, and that's the capital funding report through 7 months. And just one comment here, it is running at 66% of we've spent about 66% of budget. That's a little ahead of where we would expect to be at this point of the year. But that is due to the fact that we have paid a number of the bills that were associated with the dredging of the ferry channel. And that, of course, type work happens at a particular time and year, and then once it happens, we pay the bill, and so it doesn't get spread out evenly over the year. So it bumped up the funding, and you can see a large expenditure there in the ferry division. Otherwise, everything looks to be running relatively normal. And with that, I am open to any questions on any of these three reports.
Great. Thank you, Joe, for all that. And I'll look to my colleagues to see if there's any questions, comments, or concerns on those three reports. I am not seeing any hands raised. So that will conclude our discussion on it. And before we move on, though, Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on items 8, 9A, or 9B?
No speakers.
No speakers. Okay, thank you. We'll continue then on to item 10 on the agenda, which is closed session. If there are no objections, I'd like to accommodate the public and take item number 11, public comment now instead of after closed session. Is there any objection to that? Seeing none. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to address this committee under item 11, public interest?
We have no speakers under public comment.
All right, great. Thank you very much to everyone and everyone for their patience during our meetings today. We're going to go ahead and be placing the public on hold for the duration of our closed session item and return after closed session to adjourn the meeting. Attorney Kim Manolius will take us into closed session. Kim?
Thanks, Chair Abbott. At this time, the Finance-Auditing Committee will go into closed session for a conference with legal counsel under Government Code Section 54956.9A for a discussion about the case listed on the agenda, Gray versus Golden Gate Bridge Highway Transportation District.
Thank you. We're going to place the public teleconferencing line into a waiting room and suspend the YouTube live stream while we're in closed session. Director